require phase-to-phase reserve osmosis, which require energy-intensive hydraulic pressure. And this could open the door for wider application of solar desalination. Already one pilot project is already constructed as a pilot is underway in the last 2 years, and the result is coming from that project is encouraging. Third, injecting water in aquifer as a strategic reserve. 2 locations in the UAE, and I understand in other parts of the Gulf, they will use in that technique strategic reserve to increase the amount if any reason cause the desalination station to stop. Exploring the economic feasibility to use the spring water within the Gulf. Historically, there is a lot of people, sailors in the Gulf, using the spring water within the seawater to use their drinking water. That spring water still exists. Whether or not that is feasible, this is an undergoing study to explore the feasibility, the commercial feasibility of that water, whether or not to explore it. Distributing the location of desalination plants outside the Gulf when it is possible. Some countries, like for example, Oman, in United Arab Emirates, they have, and Saudi Arabia, they have coast outside the Gulf, and that will give them another strategic opportunity to build or to distribute the desalination plant outside the Gulf. Encouraging the R&D to provide solution to water associated with oil produced, if it can be used, for agriculture. There is a huge amount of water is lying underground. However, that water is contaminated. Whether or not the R&D, the academia will come up with solution to use that water, this is something I think worth to explore and worth to follow. There is an encouraging example in Oman. They have a pilot project to grow sugar cane on a water that is produced with oil. But the situation in Oman is a little bit different because the contamination is less than the rest of the Gulf state. We also an initiative to open the new sector of consumption of treated water. Still in the Arab region or in this part of the world, treated water is not, people, they don't like to drink treated water. But there is a lot of different usage for treated water. Treated water can be used for agriculture, industry, and for energy, and for district cooling as well. So to open a new area of consumption, treated water, that will save fresh water for human consumption. And introducing hydroponic system for agriculture that will help to reduce the amount of water used for irrigation, and as a result, we will save underground water. Building dam to prevent water from going to the sea, as well as to protect area in the vicinity of the water and help to recharge the reservoir. And I have the privilege yesterday to visit one of the important dams in Jordan, in Ajloon district, Kufranja, and that dam has the capacity of 8 million metric to store water. Building that dam where it is possible will help to recharge the reservoir and to help to prevent water from going to the sea or to lose that water. This is a number of examples of how we can increase the supply side. For the sake of time, I will stop here. But before I conclude, I need to stress the importance of attracting the private sector and the R&D and the academia to be more involved in the water sector, hand in hand with the government, to make this sector more resilient. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Matar, for the insight into the policies and mitigation. Since Dr. Matar elaborated on the challenge which is in relation to water supply, I may ask Dr. Roula Majdalani She is the Director of Sustainable Development Policies Division at the UNESCWA, and her field of expertise is the integrated approaches, integrated water resource management, and green economy. So Dr. Roula Majdalani, in light of the other services, the other water resources, and talking about the risks which Anders highlighted, saying we are facing the SDGs with a tougher indicators. What you can tell us about the initiatives from the UNESCWA in relation to these indicators, please?
Thank you, Ghazi. Good morning again. I will take it again. I will not repeat what Anders very eloquently presented and very comprehensively presented as like the key challenges to water security in the region. But interestingly enough, I will say that what we're addressing in ESCWA cover the dimension of looking at security, the challenge to security being the challenge of water scarcity, the challenge of low productivity of the use in water, a challenge of management, a challenge of quality, a challenge of transboundary, having more than 60% of the water also coming from outside the region, and over like 70 ground and surface water are shared in the region. And then the impact of climate change, which this region suffers much more than if you compare it to emission of CO2 emissions. The region is more of a suffers the impact of climate change that come from outside the region. So what ESCWA is doing, and in terms of contextualizing the SDGs, I'm very happy to say that this is also rooted from an ESCWA initiative that we've done on MDG+. Now, the MDG+ is basically looking at what the goal 7 under the MDGs on access, on increasing, improving access to water supply and sanitation, and looking at what does that mean in a regional context. And what we found is that it's not just a matter of looking at increasing access, but also looking at the quality of the service, the intermittence. You can be connected to networks, but whether you have water in the networks is not guaranteed. Jordan, for example, has it once a week. Lebanon and Palestine have it 2 or 3 times a week. So what does that mean in terms of access to water? The issue of quality is a very important dimension, and with increasing consumption of water, but also increasing economic activities, increasing use of pesticides in agriculture, and low productivity in a number of areas, it is also affecting the quality direly. The importance of sanitation and access to sanitation. Now, under the SDGs, these issues have been covered, but in the MDGs we have looked at these issues, and the important thing about the MDG Plus initiative is that we have looked at where are the challenges and put a set of additional indicators that very much have ushered the SDG process. Ushered the SDG process not just in terms of the set of indicators, but what do we do with the indicators? In the previous session, we were talking about the nexus, and we were saying, okay, what next? In that initiative on the MDG Plus, what we looked at is how do the water utilities work with the statistics and with the water resource management, and how do you establish these dialogues? How do you establish better understanding of where are the challenge area? And that will, I think, put the region in a better position to, when the time comes to collect the information, set the nationally determined data, and align them with the national development plans on sustainable development. So this initiative, I think the work on SDGs can learn a lot from the MDG process. I will very briefly continue with other initiatives that we're doing on climate change. Looking at UNESCWA has been doing has led a regional initiative on assessing the impact of climate change on water resources and on productive sectors. And what we've had through the regional climate modeling that we've done for the Arab region, we have found that the region is going to be in the coming 50 years will be gravely affected with the increasing temperature rise, but also less rainfalls, and in different locations. Particularly affected will be the coastal area, but also inside the region, and that that needs to be really highlighted, brought into national also planning and strategy in an integrated way, and has allowed us to work with the Arab negotiators on climate change to push for the agenda on adaptation as much as mitigation. And this is where one would emphasize the importance of policy or science policy interface, learning from knowledge coming out of this modeling, and then how do you translate it into data on the ground, how do you share it with policymakers, and then how do you put it into into national development plans. And what you find is that in the NDCs, many countries in the region have emphasized the adaptation side in that. On the issue of the nexus, we have been worked with at a number of levels. The institutional level is the very important, if you want, starting point to bring experts, but also policymakers in the ministries of water and ministries of environment. Now, we know you need the fact that you need energy for desalination, for wastewater treatment, for water pumping. We know that, but the fact that you use water for oil production, this is where I think is an important challenge, and I think our partners in the Gulf region are very mindful of that and working on bringing more efficiency in oil production, cleaner production processes that will safeguard water resources. And this is where we need to have a more advanced dialogue in that sense that looks at the local level, at the utilities level, to understand where is energy going in terms of water services and how much water is wasted for that, and bring out the efficiency dimension, but also not only at the national level, but as a regional process. There is a lot of benefit to be gained from that learning process at the regional level. On the transboundary issues, I think we really need to be, there is a lot of learning to be done. This is a region where surface and groundwater are shared, and to a large extent, and a lot of water is coming from outside the region. So we really need, there is a lot to be learned in terms of data, in terms of monitoring, in terms of sharing knowledge, and it's an ongoing process. However, one needs to also be realistic that in the context of insecurity that is prevailing in the region, regional cooperation is is affected, and regional cooperation maybe is restricted. In many ways, we find that sharing of data does not get through. We find that, for example, ministries that used to, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, used to have a department for shared water management. Nowadays, these departments are either being restructured, or the people working in these areas have more restricted room to maneuver. And it's important to be mindful of the geopolitical context. This is what I wanted to highlight, that to seriously work on transboundary issues, we need to be very mindful of what is going on in the geopolitical arena. And you cannot have true cooperation on shared water when we still have countries under occupation. And this is this is part of the fact of the region and the challenges of water security that we need to deal with. I will stop at that, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roula. Well, speaking of the climate change and also the models that has to be put before the policymakers, and referring to the pricing and tariffs and subsidies within the water sector, I would like to ask Dr. Hammou Laamrani. Dr. Hammou, he had his PhD from Copenhagen on water management for food security and environmental policy. And he did work for the International Water Management Institute, and he worked also for GIZ, and he's still working for GIZ and a focal point at the League of Arab States as a coordinator and for the regional initiatives. So, Dr. Hammou, how do you see the tariff and subsidies in light of the climate change?
Thank you, Dr. Ghazi. I will second my colleague panelists in thanking the organizers and thanking the World Bank for sharing with us the reflection on water security assessment in the Arab region. At this phase, it's not, we are usually invited to comment on things where they are done. So thank you for taking those reflections from the region while the work is still ongoing. One of the tragedies of water as a common pool in this region is exactly the lack of economic valuation of water. It's not considered even in the calculation of the cost of production of economic goods. Water is not taken into consideration in such calculation. Of course, it has a cultural dimension, but we should not put on the cultural dimension everything. Putting an economic value on water has been changing over the last few years. Many countries are starting to consider reforming their tariff systems to make them instruments for economic saving, but also for water physical saving. This is not happening the same way. It's easier to reform the water tariff for the domestic water supply, and it has not been as successful in agriculture, which is the big consumer. And that requires more rigorous policies and more courageous policies that give a signal that water has an economic value. And the investments made in the sector are also having an opportunity cost. If the investments are not put in that water, they can be put in other sectors that are sectors that generate income, create jobs, and contribute to the growth, as I mentioned in the session today in the morning. Is it possible? Yes. There are countries that have quite a functioning cost recovery systems that are sustainable, because the issue is that putting an economic value on water does not mean that we are selling water to the consumer. It's just that we are making the consumer understand that water is like health. It has no price, but it has a cost. And that cost should be shared and could be included in the thinking of the way we consume the scarce resources we have in the region. So there are bold steps in the region, Tunisia, Morocco, and there is even a bright spot in agriculture in Morocco. That's a private-public partnership in irrigation, where the farmers are paying exactly 10 times what the farmers are paying when getting the service from the public irrigation scheme. And the benefit margin is good enough because the irrigation scheme has been operating for more than 15 years. And of course, it's not contributing to food security because it's producing crops that are exported. So that means that if the private sector is put more as a partner of governments in saving water in agriculture with good regulation, that's a key word I would like to stress. It can be a way of contributing to food security and at the same time at rationalizing the consumption of water in agriculture by the introduction of new technologies and good practices in agriculture. Another example is now in implementation in Morocco too. It's a 10,000 hectare that is using solar energy for desalination for irrigation, not for domestic consumption. So this said, I give those examples, but also what is happening recently in the GCC countries in terms of revising the water tariffs is a signal that we need to put an economic value in water. But putting an economic value in water should not be a compromise on equity in services for the poor men and women. And here also, I'm sorry to bring only examples in Morocco, not because they are only happening in Morocco, but because I'm not aware of other examples happening elsewhere. The smart card for non-served neighborhoods in some big cities. Next to عشوائيات يعني where the poor men and women got a volumetric share and they use their card, smart card, to get a quantity of water, and whenever that quantity is consumed for free, then they have to pay for the rest, and it's working. There are almost 70 neighborhoods in marginalized parts of big cities that are benefiting from this kind of service. So this kind of innovation, social equity, but giving strong signals to the consumer that the water we are not using efficiently and wisely in a region that is facing scarcity should be clear. Climate change is a stressor of a difficult situation we are already facing. If you look into the per capita share of water in Jordan or in Yemen today, that's what the world is afraid of. And that happened in 50 and maybe at the end of the century. So we are already having good practices in what we need to do in preparing ourselves to adapt to climate change. And yesterday we heard that not only agriculture and water availability will be affected, but this will reflect on all water services, including water utilities in this region with climate new challenges. So climate is going to be exacerbating existing problems. The good news is there are revised and updated water strategies in several Arab countries. Some of them are translated into programs, and as the report is reflecting, there is some progress in water supply and sanitation. We should acknowledge that the countries are doing their best, except that their best is not enough, given the situation we are living in. I will second His Excellency Ustaz Matar in saying that how can we reverse the trend? We need to do more of what I often call the 4 R's. That's research first, and research for reuse, research for reduce, and research for recycle. What we need to understand in this region when we think of water security is that water is not oil. You just don't consume it and becomes smoke. The consumptive share of water is relatively small. What you can make of the same drop of water is big. If you have the good technology, sustainable finance, good capacities, and good institutions. Examples are existing elsewhere in the world, and the lab case and the most impressive one is the Singapore experience. So we have some margin for using our collective intelligence in the region to make the best reuse, the best reduction, and the saving and recycling and reusing. That's the most important.